Here's two guys that once rode a gazelle from Mexico to Canada, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 37 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In today's episode, I cover 3 important survival topics and fly solo. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Today's show is sponsored by Cat's Coffee. If you're looking for truly exceptional coffee to help you survive the morning or the next zombie apocalypse, you need to be drinking Cat's. They specialize in the finest coffee from sources that prioritize environmental responsibility and are fair trade certified. Their goal is to achieve perfection in every cup. Check them out at Catz, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com, or click on their bright green banner on the site and make sure you're dealing with an official sponsor of the show. Again, that's Catz, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com. So if today is your first day tuning in, I usually have a co-host who is missing. That's right, I'm flying solo. Jonathan is out sick, or so he claims. Before we dive into today's main topic, I want to answer a listener's question that actually we've gotten a couple of times, so I figured I'd go ahead and put it out over the air. So Bud writes in, what is the name of the intro song that you guys use for the podcast? I absolutely love it. Is there a way I can get a copy of the song or an MP3 or something? Well, the truth is, it's actually a loop from GarageBand. It's not a proper song. It's called Greasy Wheels, and it's in Apple's GarageBand, which is the primary piece of software we use to record the show. The Black Keys were supposed to do a theme song for us, but they're still mad at Jonathan and I for taking them in a highly competitive game of badminton. Still claim we distracted them with the goat, put tactical Weimaraner dust in their drinks, and ultimately hustled them. But if you didn't get it, don't worry. It was only a mildly funny joke anyway. But there you have it, our dirty little secret. Actually, it's not a dirty little secret, but there you have it for those that are interested. It's a loop. It's not a real song. One day we will eventually, at some point, get our act together and get a real theme song going for the show. But until then, I happen to think it's a very snappy little intro and exit. So there you have it. So the 3 topics of today are essentially 3 different kind of conversations I've either had with myself or with listeners or stuff from here and there. The topic 1, I'm going to start off with the listener's email that he sent us. And it wasn't a question, it was really more of a statement. Let's see, Anthony wrote in, oh, by the way, people, if you do not want us to say your name on the air, you need to say that in the email. We do occasionally read emails and such that listeners send in every once in a while. So if you really don't want us to use any kind of name at all, we'll just say person from nowhere said something, and we won't mention your name. So, that said, Anthony, I'm assuming it's okay to use your name since I'm not saying where you're from and your last name. But anyway, Anthony writes in, I've started developing a training schedule for important skills, fire starting, knot tying, lock picking, and creating lists of things I need to gather to be better prepared. I have to admit that I did start buying some gear, but nothing over the top, as I took your advice and slowed down a bit. I now have an EDC bag, the beginnings of a bug-out bag, and am scheduled for firearms training with my wife. Dude, that's awesome. I'm treating this as a journey, not a destination. My head was swimming a week ago, but now I've settled down a bit. I'm starting to have fun instead of a quasi-panic. I like your approach to make life better rather than just preparing for the worst. You know, that really does my heart a lot of good, because those are very important topics that we've brought up in the previous 36 episodes, which is that if you're just planning for the worst case scenario, one, all you're doing is creating a lot of stress in your life because you're worrying about something that very well may never come to pass. So if that's all you're preparing for, then you are putting all of your eggs in that one basket and focusing on something that may or may never happen. Whereas if you're preparing in such a way that everything you do now makes your life better, but it also prepares you for when bad things happen. And bad things do happen. Another important part of this is the skills that we talk about all the time and how important skills really are. Gear can break or gear can go missing, any number of things. Skills will never, they can't be taken away. But I'll tell a story on myself in case anybody's sitting there feeling alone in the gear obsession, as I like to call it. I think in the last 2 weeks, I have obsessed over a Barker River Bravo 1 field knife that I completely don't need. A Phil Rose survival knife, which is about twice the price of the previous knife I just mentioned. And again, it's something I don't need. I really want it, but I don't need it. A Council Tool velvet cut axe. You know, for all that tree felling I'm going to be doing on the Gulf Coast here. Tomahawks, and too many brands to mention. So you're not alone. If you're still in the realm of worrying and freaking out about gear, or maybe beating yourself up a little bit over whether or not you want this piece of gear or that piece of gear, and it's, oh, I really shouldn't be worrying about gear. We all do it. And I don't think at any point in our development as survivalists, we don't want it. I think there is almost an innate human desire to accumulate things, especially when we think they'll help us survive. I mean, look at the way we treat food. I mean, this has been overdone in the media, but if you can look around America and people have so much excess weight on them because very low energy requiring food is extremely readily available. And yet, instead of moderating ourselves, we continue to eat. There's a lot of reasons that we can go into for that are not really inside the scope of the show. But the point is, when it comes to survival things, we tend to overconsume no matter what we're talking about. But what does gear actually do for us? Gear is, in many ways, a supplement for skills, or at least it can be, depending on the gear we're talking about. But it is not a replacement for skill. And yeah, there are things that can be considered gear that you can't really do without in some situations, no matter how much skill you have. If total disaster has come, I do not believe anyone, even that has the skill to produce, will say Cipro, a really strong antibiotic. I don't think it matters who you are. If you have the skill or not, there is a situation where there is certain stuff that is required to make that is just outside the reach of that scenario. And if you don't have it, your body is not going to fight off some really nasty infection. So there are, just like any rule, I mean, there are exclusions. So another thing to think about with gear is that the best gear only makes a difference in skilled hands most of the time. I was just talking about knives a second ago. There are some truly amazing, some works of art, survival knives out there. And they can get really expensive. And pardon the pun, but some point, you are just splitting hairs over which one's better than another. I mean, God, I think at one point I was looking at a Mad Dog knife, and those things can be, a couple grand. But the initial reaction to them, I guess if you could afford them, is, well, it's the absolute best, I have to have it. Yeah, in the hands of a trained Navy SEAL that actually was supposed to have it. But for the rest of us, I don't know, I go out and hack up a few limbs in the woods to make a shelter or something. I don't really know how much of a difference it's going to make in my survival. Something else we've brought up a couple of times in a couple of different episodes, which is our belief that if you don't know how to use a piece of gear, you shouldn't buy it. Well, I thought this would be a really great conversation to bring up the subtleties of that statement. And there's a couple. And the first one is, we're not telling you to never buy gear that you don't know how to use. What we're really doing is hopefully motivating you to say, yeah, I really wanted to go buy that 48 gross crate of sutures, but I don't know how to use them. Maybe I should learn how to use them. And that's really where we're trying to motivate you to, is to not just accumulate survival stuff, but instead learn how to use it and really make sure that you're not just depending on gear and supplies and storage of random things. Sutures are a great example. And I think in a previous episode with Ron, we were talking about that, yeah, I do know how to use sutures. I haven't done it in a long time, but I'm pretty confident in my abilities that if I absolutely had to, if I slashed my leg or something, I could suture it up. If absolutely there was no hospitals around, it had to be done, I could do it. But if I didn't have the skill, having the gear, the sutures, would do me no good. If somebody was around, and I knew somebody was going to be around in that moment where I cut my leg or whatever, yes, they could make a difference. But you see where we're going with this? It's kind of like, I've got it. Maybe there'll be a guy there that actually knows how to use it. Maybe there won't. So it's really about motivating, not telling you not to do it, not telling you not to buy it, but really, hey, you want to buy it, that's great. We're totally behind that. We think you should, but much more so, you need to learn how to use it. And another little story, about a week ago, my girlfriend informed me that we would be going to a wedding in the Dominican Republic this summer, I think. And instantly, all of these things started flying through my head. What did I know about the Dominican Republic? What kind of dangers were there? All these other things. And I'm a kind of an imaginative guy, and sometimes it can run away. And I start daydreaming about, well, what do I do? What would I do if, while flying to the Dominican Republic, not that there's any random deserted islands between Houston and the Dominican Republic, but what if the plane goes down over the ocean and, we're coming up on this desert island? How would I react to that, and what would I do? Don't worry, there is a point to this story in a second. But I started thinking through what would happen. What would be the course of action? What would be the skills that would come into a play? What do I know about airplanes and exiting an airplane, and what the greatest dangers are in exiting an airplane and water landings and things like that? And also, once you get out and you get into a raft to, get to the desert island that's in my head in this daydream. But, how do you properly pull other people into the raft that maybe didn't get into the raft? And I'm thinking through all these different skills. And it led me to a question. How far have my skills actually come? I could be completely wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure it was in Neil Strauss's Emergency, where he was talking to the very famous survivalist Tom Brown. And he was posing the question to Tom Brown, if you had to go out into the woods, and you were going out, total survival scenario, what would be the one thing you would take with you? And Tom Brown, and he's repeated this a couple of times in a couple of different places in a couple of different ways, but it was basically, if I had to choose, it would be a knife. There's a very important thing right there, if I had to choose. And he was implying, and has in several other statements, that, well, I don't really need anything. I can walk out into the woods with just the clothes on my back and do what I need to do to live and take care of myself. And back I think when I read that, I really kind of thought, that's kind of nutty. I'm not buying it. But after the other day thinking through these things and I started questioning my own skills, I started thinking, well, what do I need? Where have my skills come to? And I started thinking about it, and I immediately kind of pictured my bug out bag and started one by one stripping things away. And I eventually came to my favorite wilderness knife and fire steel. And then I realized, actually, I don't even think I would absolutely have to have those anymore. Now, I'm not saying I am the most amazing bushcraft, Ron Hood, Cody Lundeen, I can't think of his partner's name on the show, but you get the idea. I'm not saying I'm that guy. I'm not saying I could, without a doubt, walk into the woods naked and be just fine. However, I am saying you do eventually come to a point where you realize, darn, I actually do have the skills where Tom Brown's statement makes sense, and I can totally see what he means. So, kind of coming back to the whole thing about gear, the more skills you have, the less you need gear. The more you realize you don't need the gear. That I guess until we reach Tom Brown enlightenment, no matter what the survival situation is, you have the skills to address the situation. And that gear makes addressing that situation easier. Yes, having the best survival in the knife in the world will make it easier in the sense that it's going to hold an edge longer. It's not going to break. It's going to cut cleaner. It's going to be perfectly balanced, and it's, going to do all these wonderful things for you. But if you have the skill, any object that you can make sharp can also do that job, just maybe not as well. That can even come to starting a fire, which to people just starting off, a bow drill alone seems complicated. And I know the first time I did it, it took me 4.5 hours to get it. And I think we joked in one episode where Jennifer, my girlfriend, walked up and bested me and started a fire in 15 minutes. That was rather humbling. But I look back now and realize, after all the research and after all the exercises and work and sometimes just goofing off and being a teenage pyromaniac, I realized that I've now accumulated 16 ways to make a fire without matches or a lighter. And 5 of those ways are completely primitive. I don't mean this isn't meant to be bragging, and I'm trying to stress that by what I said earlier about that I don't think I'm the greatest bushcraft guy in the world. I'm just trying to iterate the point that the gear supplements skill. But if you have the skill, you don't necessarily have to have the gear. And this has even led to Jason McConnell, the Redneck Resource, who's been on the show a couple times, and we've got to have him back soon to talk about what he's been up to. He's been doing some really interesting and exciting stuff and just amazing research on aquaponics lately, so that we're really fleshing out the urban survival self-sufficiency project that we have going on. But he and I have decided in probably towards the end of January, as a way of really kind of seeing where our skills are at, we're going to do an ultralight hiking trip that's going to be about 30 miles, I think. And the basic goal is neither one of us are taking a tent. We are taking some very basic supplies with us. But the goal of the trip is to take as bare minimum as possible and to try to use as little of what we actually take with us as possible to really test and really see where have our bushcraft skills gone. And I know this is an urban show and bushcraft skills may seem a little outside the realm of it, but they're really not. There are fundamentals and there are mindsets and there are all kinds of little nuggets of mental beauty inside learning bushcraft that really do translate into urban survival. So if you get the chance, we talk about storing food and we talk about all the other things, but we do, at least I do strongly believe that some level of bushcraft should also be part of that. And that actually brings up another listener email that Jeep, the moderator of our forum, sent me. We were having a conversation back and forth, and I'm just going to clip out the best part, which was already made manager for our disaster assessment team. I'm leaving out the location. Red Cross joined up with my volunteer fire department, starting EMS training this spring, made IIT1 for Appleseed, and have joined a MAG with 4 families. Also in October, we're having a class for forging, land navigation, map, compass, primitive fire making. And I actually get a lot of emails like that where people are really branching out and taking the message that Jonathan and I have to heart in learning the skills, not just acquiring the gear. And I think most importantly, branching out and becoming part of their community and becoming part of the solution within their community. One of the things, I don't know if I've ever said it on the show, but one of the things I've said in passing conversations, which is when people say to me, well, rural areas are the safest. And we can debate that back and forth and to the end of time. But I kind of look at it this way. If things really, truly do go that bad, and everybody with any lick of sense and skill has left the city, who is going to be left to tend to those? And we can say that it's something that you do willingly, but who's going to be left to take care of those cities where most of the world's population now lives, as it turns out? So somewhere in my stream of consciousness, these two things flow together. But in thinking about the desert island, which I think, we do all these things, and we've talked about having a personal information packet and stuff. But one of the things that we've never brought up on the show is the idea of a personal operations manual. And what that is, if I am the husband in a marriage, and I have certain responsibilities, let's say I pay the bills, or let's say I handle getting an electrician when something in the house breaks, or whatever, you get the idea. There are responsibilities that in a family we each take care of, so that there is a balance of workload. But whether you're the husband or the wife or whatever, if something happens to you tomorrow, all of those little things that you take care of, will your spouse know how to instantly take care of them for you? We have life insurance, and we do things, and we think, okay, that's taken care of now. Now, if something happens to me, they're all good. But think about how much turmoil and just aggravation, and you're adding all of that onto somebody who's already grieving over you after you're gone. So much like the personal information packet, consider putting together a booklet or a document of some kind, something that your spouse knows where it is and how to use it, that clearly lists telephone numbers of people that they need for different things. If it's the yard guy or the electrician or whatever, and how to get in touch with them, any special notes about things like that. And as parents, we can talk about, not that I have children, but I'm involved in a family business, so these kinds of things are kind of a constant consideration for me, which are, if both of my parents go down in a plane tomorrow, that's 2 jobs within a 60-something-year-old family business that each of them have been doing for, I want to say 40 years of that business's existence. If they don't leave behind an operations manual, well, we're not only going to be, my brother and I would not only be in a mess trying to sort out their properties and their personal items and their personal life, we'd also be having to sort out their jobs and how they do different things. How does my father handle the books and all the accounting and all the financial things and dealing with the banks? And do we know who to talk to at the bank? And do we know who to talk to for this or that? And the same thing with my mother. So even as parents, and I think regardless of your children's age, having an operations manual for them If they're too young for it to be of use, let's say, I'm just going to pick a number out of the air. Let's say they're younger than 15, and they're very obviously not going to be taking care of themselves. Who do they go to in the event? Have you already figured out who is to be their guardian? And prepare an operations manual and let that guardian know where that operations manual is. What are the medications this child needs? What are the schools? What are the doctors? What are the everything about this child that somebody else could pick up that manual and go, oh, okay, simple enough. I got it. Little Johnny goes to soccer on this day, and he goes to this school at this time, and he likes peanut butter, but he's allergic to it, and, he goes to this doctor, and blah, 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 and on and on. The operations manual, it's not just one. It's a couple. If you have children, it's how does somebody else pick up where you left off and take care of your children? And also, as a parent, it's if your children are old enough, how do they pick up your life if something happens to you and take care of things, even if it's just to deal with inheritance and stuff like that? And usually we talk about this in the form of a will, but I'm going to guess a lot of people out there don't have wills, at least not that extensive. Something to think about. The idea of putting together an operations manual for your husband, for your wife, for your children, for guardians of your children, for anybody that needs to understand how to run your duties of your estate and your personal life when you go, so that your departure does not make their lives more chaotic and more difficult than it needs to be. How you go about putting that all together, the technical details of it, I think we don't need to have a long discussion about that. It's kind of like putting the personal information packet together, and there'll be a link to that in the show notes for those that have never looked at it before, or those that want to kind of go back and get a bit of a refresher. And I'd also like to give credit where credit is due. This was not my brilliant idea that I came up with. This was actually my brother's idea, and he was talking to me about it, I want to say about 9 months ago, and he was talking about doing this for his wife. If something should happen to him, his wife would have no idea how to tend to several different things, and we were talking about it, and then he started talking about that we need to do that for the things my parents do. So credit to my brother, brilliant idea, and I hope y'all take the advice too and make your loved ones' lives easier when your inevitable time comes. So on to something a little less dark, maybe, is another listener kind of question that came up on the forum. And for those of you not on the forum, you're missing some really fantastic conversations. And that address is forum.intherabbithole.com. There's also a big red link to it on the right-hand side of the site. So topic number 3 is, who do I listen to? Not me personally, but just in speaking. And the listener brought up pretty good conversation on the forum, which was, what is the general consensus of people here regarding the Rawlsian method / ideal? And for those not familiar, he was referring to James Rawle, the author of Patriots. And if you read my review of Patriots, you know that while I respect Rawls, I think his writing is terrible, and I thought the book was terrible. You can agree with me, disagree with me. It's an opinion. Peace was an opinion, but it seemed like it really kind of struck a chord with a number of people that they were kind of glad somebody finally said they didn't like his book and didn't agree with his book. But I do disagree pretty strongly with Rawls on some things and only mildly on others. And I know Jonathan feels the same way. We talked at length for quite some time before I actually wrote that review of Patriots. I actually wrote that review, one of the very first articles I wrote for the website, but the first review of it was a lot more critical. And I think in some ways there was almost made it too personal. And so I let it sit and let it simmer and just left it alone for almost a year, and then recently went back and kind of rethought through some things and edited it and made it less about the author. But his question really kind of brought up something interesting for me. which was there are many voices in the survival realm. There are as many, if not more, opinions than there are survivalists out there. They all have something good to say, and they all have something bad to say. Even me. I say stupid things. I've said stupid things on the show. Or I've not elaborated on what we were talking about. There was an episode where Jonathan and I were talking about fuel storage, and we completely left out of the conversation using stabilizers for that fuel storage. And we haven't really brought it back up on the show because I'm trying to get somebody who really does have a background in that to come on and genuinely talk about it. I'm going to try to get somebody from Staybill or the other company to come on to the show and really talk about it. But that's kind of the other thing too, is if I realize I've said something goofy, as long as I know it's not going to hurt anybody, I'm not going to go back and immediately jump in and be like, oh my God, I was wrong, and I said the wrong thing, or I didn't really elaborate the right way. Instead of doing that, as long as it's not life or death for someone, I'd much rather wait and say, let me bring somebody on and then address it then. And that's actually the only thing that's ever stood out in the history of the show that we've either said that was wrong or not elaborated on. And for the person that wants to talk about the antenna thing, I know that's another one where we're bringing somebody in to actually explain it fully, why what we said was both right and wrong. It depends on how you look at it. But moving on, the point is, there are a lot of voices out there. Depending on the scenario, all of our plans fail. A solar flare can happen tomorrow, and if it's a big enough solar flare, it will reach deep enough into the earth that it doesn't matter what bunker you've built, how deep you've dug it, you're fried. There are things and situations where Rawls' plans of running off to the woods and being in occlusion don't work, and they fail. There are instances where staying in the city is the wrong thing to do, depending on what we're talking about here. But one of the things I said in response to this person in giving my opinion on what he said, or the question he was asking, which is, take it all in, but examine it closely. Take a good long look at it, take in the good, toss out the trash, and build your own opinion. Then always stay open to being wrong and ready to correct your course. But, and I'm going to read the last part of my response to him, which was, the kicker is, in the end, all philosophies will take you to a similar level of prep. The question is, which one gets you there on a road you like traveling, at a speed you like traveling at, and alongside people you like traveling with? But my advice is, find voices in the community you like. Hopefully you like us. I guess you must if you're listening to us. For, what do we have here, 37 episodes now. But even if this is just your first time tuning in, find the voices you like. Listen to what they have to say. But listen critically. Don't just blindly take in whoever it is you like. Whether it's Jonathan and I, whether it's guests we have on, whether it's Jack Spirko, who's another fantastic show, or what Rawls writes on his blog, or any of the other hundreds of survival websites that are out there talking about what to do in a disaster. You have to think critically. You have to question the information people give you. You have to question their motives for why they're giving it to you in that way, and what their background is, what's leading them to that opinion. I'm going to wrap up with one last quick topic, which is a really great book a listener sent to me, and actually he also happened to be the author of that book, which was The Survival Template. It's a short book. You're going to be kind of surprised by how much weight is in such a short book, and I'm going to have a review of it out this Wednesday, but it's called The Survival Template, and it's by John Heatherly. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's a really great book, and there will be a link to it in the show notes today. Like I said, it's a short book, but it really kind of fits in with the theme of today's kind of topics that I've been covering, and it's more about mindset and goals and how to get from point A to point Z, whether we're talking about survival or just making your life better today. So hopefully I didn't ramble on too much, left to my own devices today, and I gave you some pretty good stuff to think about and ponder on till next week. And we're working on getting Scout from Appleseed on for the next show, and hopefully Jonathan's antibiotics kick in and get him back in here, or he stops playing hooky. I don't know why I'm looking at his chair like he's listening to me. And with that, we wrap up episode 37. Thank you for joining us. Help support In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast and blog. We're now accepting applications for show sponsors. For more information, please use the contact form on the site and choose option Advertise. If you like the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. If you didn't, well, why not tell us about it using the contact form on the site? Seriously, the show is for you, the listener. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Urban Survival Forum through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com and on the forum, forum.intherabbithole.com. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. By connecting with us, you receive updates about the site and notifications of new articles and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site, intherabbithole.com, that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each episode where we invite you to comment on the show and interact with us. From Houston, Texas. Till next time, stay safe and sound.